Joe Biden has won the American presidential election.
This is a fraud on the American public.
In a stunning display from a sitting president, Donald Trump launching an assault on the integrity of the election.
Losing is never easy. Not for me, it's not.
The aftermath of the 2020 presidential election sent shockwaves through the foundations of American democracy.
It's not over. The whole world's watching us. Right now, they're watching us to see if we have a democracy.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building. Fight for Trump!
Across the country, allegations of fraud meant election officials found themselves under attack.
There were some death threats.
People like me will really go after people like you.
And he said that they were coming to take me out, to kill me.
You're going to pay for it. You will pay for it.
We're in an environment right now where election officials are being targeted.
Baseless claims of widespread voter fraud and unwarranted abuse of election officials raised the level of discontent with the democratic system to a boiling point.
Let's have trial by combat!
The Capitol was violently attacked. And today, 40% of Americans don't believe that Joe Biden is the legitimate president of the United States. That's a scary place to be.
As the risk of political violence increases, will the results of the upcoming midterms make the 2024 presidential elections the ultimate challenge to American democracy? On September 1st, 2022, Joe Biden warned voters that the nation was under threat.
Equality and democracy are under assault. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
It can be compared to the kind of approach that Donald Trump has taken, although that's a stretch. But he's still basically saying a large chunk of the American population is now a threat to the survival of American democracy. And that's a pretty strong statement for a president of the United States to make.
Democracy cannot survive when one side believes there are only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated.
Some Republicans actually approved of Biden's speech.
I agreed with just about everything he said. I think that it's important to talk right now about the anti-democratic forces that are at work in American politics, specifically that are generated by Trump.
67% of all Americans worry the nation's democracy is in danger of collapse. And 71% of those who voted for Trump in 2020 believe America will be less of a democracy within a generation.
Americans are really concerned. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, you see the threat in kind of mirror opposite terms. Republicans have bought, by and large, Donald Trump's claim that the 2020 election was stolen, and as a result, they think that the system is now rigged. The overriding concern on the Democratic side now is that the Republicans' suspicion that the system is being rigged is leading to not just threats of political violence, but actual political violence. At a moment, there's a war being waged against the integrity of the American electoral system.
From false claims of widespread voter fraud to questioning the validity of voters, poll workers, and ballots, Trump and his allies have been seeding doubt.
There's a few other people I'd like to send right down to the prison down here in Florence. Anybody who was involved in that corrupt, shady, shoddy election of 2020.
This was the scam of the century, and this was the crime of the century.
But attacks on the integrity of elections have gone beyond casting doubt on votes.
We found at the start of 2021 that state lawmakers were introducing an unprecedented number of restrictive voting laws. These are laws that make it harder for eligible Americans to register to vote and stay on the voter rolls.
In 2021, state legislators proposed more than 566 voting restriction bills, 93% of them put forward by Republicans. The majority of them failed or were rejected, but of the 52 enacted across 25 states, 45 were proposed by Republicans, some of whom supported Trump's lie.
Election denialism and voter fraud has been used to justify many of these restrictive laws that have been passed in the last 2 years. voters can start to doubt the integrity of the whole system, even if they don't believe the lies. And so voting, which is an activity that should be straightforward, simple to accomplish, and part of what we get to do as part of a democracy, then becomes saddled with barriers.
The restrictions differ from state to state, but they include narrowing who is allowed to cast mail-in ballots, limits on the use of drop boxes, restricting the window of time voters have to request and submit their ballots, and voter ID restrictions.
We are seeing efforts in Republican-controlled states to make it harder to vote. There's no simpler way to put it. Now, there already is a patchwork of rules in place across the country. In some states like New York, which is dominated by Democrats, it actually can be pretty hard to vote in New York, but there are efforts underway to make it easier. What we're seeing in some Republican-controlled states, Georgia, Texas are two examples, are efforts to make it harder. What we see with these kinds of restrictions is that it puts communities of color over and over again at a real disadvantage. And so core Democratic voters can wind up being effectively disenfranchised this way.
6 states have gone a step further.
Right now, Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and Oklahoma have passed 9 election interference laws in 2022. For example, some of these laws criminalize election officials from encouraging a person who may be eligible to vote by mail to indeed apply to vote by mail. So think about if you're a voter with a disability, or you're an elderly voter, or you're somehow otherwise qualified to vote by mail. That kind of behavior of just encouragement to use a perfectly legal form of voting is now criminalized, and that election official is now subject to prosecution.
Hi, I'm John Prideaux, the Economist's US editor. Our journalists roam America every week looking for the most interesting, most important stories about US politics. If you want to see all our coverage of US politics, the midterms, what they mean for America, our election forecast model, then please click on this link.
Despite previous voting restriction laws, there's been an upward trend in voter turnout during elections. However, the impact of the latest round of restrictions on the 2022 midterms is yet to be determined. But the fear of prosecution isn't the only thing concerning election workers.
You frauded out America of a real election where Donald Trump blew your lie in out of the water. And guess what? You should be executed under federal prison.
The 2020 presidential election cycle was the most stressful and challenging of my career.
I would have never thought that I would have had to go through something like that. It was awful.
We'll kill you. We will demand an audit. We will demand the truth. Liberal-ass lying rhino. We will take you out.
They used a lot of sexual terms, and that I deserved a knife to my throat, deserved to be executed publicly.
It wasn't until we got to the first stop sign that we realized that we were being followed. It was an awful, awful night.
Trump further fueled the abuse by publicly calling out several election officials who helped certify the results.
For me, it got worse when Trump put me up on a big screen at a rally here in Valdosta, Georgia.
I'm going to ask you to look up at that very, very powerful and very expensive screen. I do this for a few people. Let's go.
That is disheveled Fulton County Elections Chief Richard Barron.
Hope you're happy, because you know whose fault this is when the hits the goddamn fan, because you know it's coming.
I received at least 150 voicemails. There were some death threats. I ended up resigning.
It went to a whole different level after the president mentioned me by name and suggested that I was trying to cover up some sort of widespread election fraud in Philadelphia that was costing him the election. The threats certainly became much more specific and largely targeted my children.
One of the extraordinary and extraordinarily upsetting spectacles that we all witnessed during this last election cycle was that we had a president of the United States directly reaching out to state election officials and pressuring them, intimidating them to take some action to change the vote count.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
He invited senior lawmakers from Michigan to come to the White House to press his case with them directly. I've never seen something like that happen before. And in each of those cases, the state officials had the guts to hold the line.
But in several states, election officials who refused to bow to the pressure from Trump's allies have been censured or replaced.
One of the things that has become very clear on the Republican side is that if you don't fall in line, if you speak out against the big lie, you are cast out of the party.
This is Mitt Romney being booed.
You are seen now as a traitor for telling the truth. There are still Republicans like me out there, but a lot of them are leaving the Republican Party because it really has moved to a more radical place.
The election hysteria of 2020 has brought the mechanics of elections to the fore and exposed vulnerabilities. All elections are operated by each individual state. Election administrators, clerks, registrars, and recorders are responsible for running the elections and have the vital role of counting the votes. The final word on certifying and reporting the result is given to the chief election official. The trend for who wants these jobs has been changing.
There's been a concerted effort by Donald Trump and his loyalists, specifically Steve Bannon, to try to recruit people at these incredibly local levels of government, the people who would certify, the people who would count.
We're taking over school boards. We're taking over the Republican Party through the precinct committee strategy. We're taking over all the elections. Suck on this, and we're going to decertify the electors, okay? And you're going to have a constitutional crisis. But you know what? We're a big and tough country, and we can handle that.
Alongside this push for election deniers to join at the local level, a lot of work is happening higher up the process.
My biggest concern right now is people running for office who've now won primaries or in general elections for key positions like governor and secretary of state, key to determining the outcome of a vote, who say they believe that the last election was stolen and are saying, well, they wouldn't let something like that happen again. In other words, they're effectively running on a promise to interfere in elections to achieve the outcome that their party wants. And that's a frightening and new development.
28 Trump-backed candidates are in the running for high-ranking state-level positions, those that are responsible for election certification.
When Arizonans had concerns about their election, Mark Fincham had the courage to hold the hearing that led to the Arizona audit.
I'm Tudor Dixon, and I'm not a politician. I'm pro-God, pro-life, pro-gun.
The MAGA movement isn't about a person, it's not about a party. It's about protecting and defending our republic, the United States of America.
We really are staring down a perilous outcome in 2022 if even a few of these officials are swept up into power.
You have made it possible.
Over 200 candidates in the running for U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and top state executive offices in the midterms have been given the nod by Trump. Of the 6 House Republicans running for re-election who voted to impeach Trump for his role in the January 6 Capitol riots, 4 lost their primary to a Trump loyalist.
Even people who were emerging in the wake of January 6th as new open critics of the president very quickly fell back into line out of fear, I think, of Donald Trump.
As the midterm elections approach, what impact will such political machinations have on the 2024 presidential election?
Donald Trump has so changed American politics. He's so poisoned the trust that a lot of Americans have had in the system that it's going to take a long time, I think, for the body politic to recover from that effect. I think at the national level, we could see Congresspeople refuse to certify a vote. Just last time around, scores of Republicans refused to certify the election because Donald Trump lost, and you could see the system simply break down.
Prior to January 6th, I would have been skeptical of political violence with an election, but post-January 6th, and with the rise of militia groups that attacked these transfers of power, political violence is now very much a concern.
Yes, I believe American democracy is under threat. To some extent, I've always feel that way. I think it's more under threat than it's been, and I think it's a good thing for Americans to feel that way, because what's hopeful about it is it might create a basis for us to actually do something about it.
To find all our coverage of the 2022 midterm elections, click the link. Thank you very much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe.